morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are. I hope you're having a fantastic day. It's SoulSaint here, and we have a new update coming along with some additional things that we haven't really talked about yet, which I want to bring to the table today. So, 8.5 update. They're going to be bringing in a lot of things we've already discussed, so you could take a definite look at some of the updates I did some footage on before about the improvements that they're doing along with Epic Empowerment that are definitely coming down the road, which we're going to be excited for. However, I did want to talk about some new things that have hit the info tab for us, for lack of better words, which is going to be what we're going to talk about today. So, new clan role, Lieutenant. It's going to introduce a new role, Lieutenants. I like the name of that. I call some of my big moderators and people who are pretty prevalent in my community Lieutenants, so that's kind of cool. These players will rank below deputies. Well, they'll still be deputies, though. And will have the right to invite new members to the clan. Furthermore, the maximum number of deputies will be increased to 5. UI changes. News tab. Raid news will be separated into 2 tabs, featured news and general news. The former will focus on the major game updates, events, and so on. The latter will focus on all other news and include various notifications such as champion spotlight or sneak peek videos, regular events, and the likes. I think I know where they're going at with this, which is kind of cool. So basically, updated news and some things there. You might see some content creators in this little tab here. That'd be really cool of playing to do that. Let's see. Rebalance champions. So we did talk about Klydna and Hakorn being updated. I don't think there's anything too crazy to scream at. I think that Klydna might have some areas where she may be valuable. Maybe like Hydra. She might be a little bit more viable there, depending on what you have on your account, of course. Hakorn, I think he leaves a lot to be desired. Now, I did want to do the bulk of today, which is going to be new champions. I have some turnaround videos that we're going to show you, particularly of one interesting champion who looks like a rooster/chicken. We'll talk about him in a little bit, though. But let's go down the list. Let's see what's coming out in the works as a part of our update for 8.5. So, Arwid, I think it's how you say her name, Arwid Quiver Grass, is an epic force champion, attack type champion for the Sylvan Watchers. Her A1 is going to be a attack one enemy has a 50% chance of stealing one random buff from the target, with the books going in towards damage. Random buff stealing is kind of an interesting one there, as well as it only being 50% no matter what. I wonder how many hits does it. It doesn't say like on a per hit basis, so I'm assuming it's a one and done. The A2 Quivergrass Vortex attacks all enemies before attacking, removes all debuffs from this champion. Has a 75% chance of removing a random buff from all enemies. Not bad. And it can be booked up to 100% chance with a 3-turn cooldown. Not a bad ability, man. They've been going along this route of like constantly introducing buff strip champions, and this is another one. So very, very interesting. Also a low-key cleanser for herself, which is kind of cool. Actually, attacks one enemy, damage increases by 30% if this champion has no active debuffs. Nice. So A2 into A3 could be pretty good for like a big slam. We'll also ignore unkillable buffs if this champion has no active debuffs. So A2 into A3 yet again could be a very valuable way to use this one. Damage increased by 30%. Depending on the multiplier, that could be pretty good. It can be booked up to a 4-turn cooldown with a little bit of extra damage spice onto the bookage. Rippling Grass, which is the passive. This champion's accuracy is increased by 50 if they have no active debuffs. Interesting. Increase ally attack and faction crits by 30%. So maybe they're just adding more value for Sylvan Watchers in general, because there's not like a crazy multitude of champions in that pool already. But also, I think everybody would agree that like Sylvan Watchers are typically very support heavy at the moment in terms of the champion pool as it is. So more damage dealer options could be a very, very interesting way. I like the buff strip. The A2 is kind of the selling point for this champion. Outside of that, though, it's an epic. So you take it for what it is. Teryx the Restless is going to be a rare Lizardman Void Defense champion. His A1 is going to be Pinpoint Thrust. Attacks one enemy, places an increased accuracy buff on this champion for 2 turns. Who else does it on the A1? I think it's like Archer from the Barbarians Legendary, the Dope Provoker. Damage increasing going on the book side of things for the A1. Spur Claw, the A2, attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn. It's on a 5-turn cooldown, bookable down to a 4-turn cooldown with a additional 25%, making it a 75% chance to land. Low on the totem pole because it's not 100% chance to land, and it's only a 1-turn duration on a 4-turn cooldown. Very, very low desire in terms of using it as a provoke champion, although it is a rare, so it's going to be a lot more accessible to players if you so happen to need a provoke champion early on. Protect the Crown. Place a 50% strength and buff on all allies for 2 turns, and then also places a counterattack buff on this champion for 2 turns. It has a chance to book down to a 3-turn cooldown. Really interesting kit. I feel like if they put the A1 provoke on the base form and they had the counterattack on the A3, that would make it a little bit more desirable, giving you more opportunities to maybe hit provoke, but interesting. But what we all really are interested in seeing is Gallius Bloodcrest is going to be our mythical Skinwalker defense champion. We like defense champions. For the Skinny Boys. The Skinny Boys are going to get some love here, and I'm actually really curious to see what this guy's kit's going to be about. Wing Clip. It's going to be base form Gallius. Is going to be Wing Clip. A1 places a decreased speed on one enemy for 2 turns. When counterattacking, the damage inflicted by this skill is based on this champion's defense and the enemy's max HP. Ooh. Ooh. When counterattacking, the damage inflicted by this skill is based on this champion's defense, so you can scale that. And enemy max HP on an A1? Interesting. Damage can be booked up to a plus 20%. Ignore resistance plus 20%. Cutting Jib or Jibe. Attack. I think it's like a Jib. Cutting Jib. Attacks all enemies. Places a provoke debuff for 1 turn if the target is a boss. Places a provoke debuff for 2 turns instead. So a provoke champion. Okay. I like that. Places an unkillable buff on this champion for 1 turn and a counterattack buff on them for 2 turns. I keep saying this them, and I wonder... It normally used to say like all allies or something like that as well, but on them, I'm assuming it's just a single counterattack buff for himself. So, this is interesting. I'm going to wait till we get done with the entire base form, and I'll start rationalizing where this could be valuable. Unkillable, provoke with a counterattack that has a scaling enemy max HP A1 with decreased speed on it. Very interesting. It can be booked up for an additional damage and ignore percent factor. It's already on a 3-turn cooldown, so you can pretty much run rampant with him instead. Provoke is already on a 2-turn against bosses. This is very something that's very key to keep in mind, by the way. Fully restores all allies. This is this A3 Bloodcrest Call. Fully restores all allies destroyed max HP. Okay. Also places a Revive on Death buff and a 60% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns. And then it can be booked down for a 3-turn cooldown. So, fully restores all destroyed HP, Revive on Death, and an increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns. Metamorph, we already know that flips into a second form. Let's see what his passive has to say. Reflects 50% of the damage this champion receives back to the attacker. So a built-in reflect. If the attacker is a boss, reflects 100% of this damage the champion receives and also heals them by 50% of the damage received. Ooh. And then, of course, he has an aura that increases all defense by 35%. I am going to say this right now. Everything about this kit screams Hydra. Reflect damage. Boss effects are amplified. So anything that he does in terms of effects are amplified if it's against a boss. So boss content's kind of something that you're paying attention to. Healing, provoke, counterattacking, unkillable. So like the fact that he places buffs for himself. I'm assuming that counterattack right now, based on the way this verbiage sounds, it seems like it's going to be pretty predicated on landing just for himself, which makes him a good viable mischief tank. Provoke tank. Enemy max HP hitter, which means that he has damage coming out. Decreased speed, never a bad thing for Hydra. Revive on Death, increased defense on all allies. That one's a little bit harder to justify in Hydra for the Revive on Death portion. The increased defense is nice across the board, especially if you're using defensive champions in that fight. And then, of course, the reflect damage. All of this is great for Hydra. The enemy max HP on an A1 is sick. Maybe you could couple him with someone that has a buff extender so that he has a longer uptime on that counterattack, meaning that he'll be able to do more counterattacks and do more enemy max HP for every hit he takes. It doesn't have to be just one particular head. That's all heads. A lot of the heads do like a lot of AoE damage, so you could see that being pretty OP. I also think that like you might see a little bit more on that value for that provoke, too. That A2 is going to be pretty good. 2-turn duration is actually a very big deal, and it's guaranteeing that it's going to happen as a part of being against the boss content, which is pretty prevalent. So, attacks all enemies makes it a lot more auto-friendly, too, as well, compared to, like, someone like Alas, for example. You have to target the champion you're trying to provoke, funny enough. So, very, very interesting kit. I like that base kit so far. It's very unique. It adds a lot all in one. That's a lot in one, for lack of better words. Let's see what his alternate form has to bring to the table. So, Fulminous Screech. Attacks when an enemy places an extra hit on all enemies under decreased defense debuffs with an extra damage increase to the book side of things. So, unless he provides decreased defense on his own, I think he does in the second form here, he gets an extra hit. I don't think the damage has the same multiplicative aspect behind the base form, so this is just, I would assume, damage multiplied by his defensive stat, or, yeah, he's defensive on this side too as well, so this is going to probably be a defensive-oriented one. Sunder Sky is A2. Attacks all enemies before attacking, places a 60% decreased debuff for 2 turns, so across all enemies. Damage increased by 10% for each enemy under decreased defense debuff. Also steals 20% of the turn meter from each enemy. Now, turn meter effects don't really benefit from Hydra right off the rip. The extra damage multiplier across the board is good everywhere for every decreased defense placed, or every enemy under decreased defense, so it doesn't have to be placed by him per se. And then, of course, you got the ignore resistance factor, so it makes it easier for you to land those without having to worry about high accuracy requirements. So that's kind of cool. Let's see here. His A3, Sonic Torture, attacks all enemies. Damage increases by 15% for each buff on each target. Decreases the duration of all enemy buffs by 2 turns. So it's a little contradictory. Like, you kind of want the extra damage. In order for that to happen, you have to have buffs on them, and then you decrease the duration afterwards. Or maybe it happens at the same time. I'm going to assume that in the order of the way the text is, we're going to see it that way. So it does damage, and then it decreases it. That's kind of interesting. And it's on a 4-turn cooldown. There's no cooldown reduction on any of these abilities so far. Can be booked for extra ignore resistance. You do need a little bit of accuracy if you're trying to reduce, I believe, the duration of enemy buffs, as well as the damage increase for books. Metamorph, we already kind of see that. Let's see what Unholy Experiment. This is his alternate form passive. Enemies under decreased defense cannot play Stun, Sleep, Fear, very big, Provoke, very big, Freeze, or Petrification. Those are very big in other areas of the game. Resets the cooldown of the Sunder Sky skill if an enemy under a decreased defense debuff is killed by that skill. Wait, what? So his A2, which does the decreased defense and amplifies the damage for each decreased defense in play, can be reset if an enemy is killed by that ability. That's not bad. Also resets the skill cooldown, the cooldown of Sonic Torture skill if an enemy under a decreased debuff is killed by that skill. Holy moly. If you're able to, like, do some wops and you're able to get some kills, then you're able to basically cycle that ability again? I wonder if there's, like, a limitation to it. The thing that sells me the most, and of course, yeah, the aura is still the same for those that are interested on his alternate form. I don't think that changes at all across multiple of the different mythics. I think they're pretty much the same across the board. I like the passive of the second form because that makes dealing with the Torment head, if that works the way that it does. But it's conditional upon decreased defense being in play. I'm not sure if that plays out the way it does. If it does, then I'd be very curious. That could solve a lot of problems for a lot of different mechanics inside. Like, this champion screams a lot of Hydra for me. I do see some small potential in PvP. Decreasing the enemy buff duration is nice. Doing damage that scales off of the fact that you're using it. Decreased defense is kind of sheepable for each iteration of sheep that's available for Polymorph. Getting extra hits off of debuffs, though, are not a bad thing. Being able to place provokes and whatnot is great for Hydra. There could be some case usage where, like, having provoke on a particular enemy where you're trying to avoid getting them using their kit that could, like, do a lot of damage to everybody. Like, think, for example, I'll just throw one out there for another mythic. Lazarius in his second form, he does, like, a big A2 that does a lot of damage, ignores shields and all these other stuff, right? Having that provoke forces the Lazarius to go against him and hit him only. And because he has Unkillable, even if Lazarius has, like, a lot of damage coming at you, he doesn't die from it, right? So, and then he also nets a counterattack, too, which could be very, very punishing against the enemy that hits him. So, there could be some mechanical play there, but there are some fallacies in that. There's a lot of situational aspects that can make this guy very challenging to get into a fight there. Depending on his multipliers, that's going to be the selling thing about this champion particularly. I do view that his ability to get damage out, though, as a byproduct of that provoke and counterattack is very interesting. I like it. And then be able to reflect damage on his base form, too, is kind of nice, too. This champion has potential. I think we'll have to see what he can do in certain areas of the game, but I think boss content he's going to do very well in. Especially like Hydra, for example. I think this is where I'm seeing the most for this guy. And I'm not going to lie, I got a rendition that I'm going to show you guys for those that are interested in it. I showed this to my live stream, which we are doing this live, by the way. Very, very interesting champion pool in terms of like adding to the mix of things. He looks really, really cool. I already kind of mentioned that he's a husky-looking, you know, rooster or chicken. I don't know if we want to call him either or. But really, really cool looking champion. I love the double axe wielding. I'm going to show you guys when he's going in his alternate form too as well, so you guys have an idea about it. This is what he looks like here. Very, very dramatic. A lot of lightning, a lot of like everything about him is elevated to the like umpteenth degree. Very, very cool looking champion. I think design-wise, it's a solid W. There's no loss here. This is a very, very cool looking champion. Big salute to Player for giving us the turn around to be able to see this guy a little bit more here. I think that's really, really cool. This champion is someone that I think you're gonna have to play test him and get a feel for him yourself. But I think I see the potential here, and I think that's a W. That's a W depending on how you're looking at it for him right there. So very, very angry rooster, or the other word if you want to go there. Behave yourselves. All right, let's get to one of the other ones that I thought was an interesting nod. Doom Lord Gregor, who is, I believe, the Barbarian Unity champion, if I'm not mistaken here. Yep, it is a Unity champion. Let's break down this kit. He's going to be a defense force champion for Barbs. His A1 attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn, with damage scaling on the book side. Earthcleave, his A2, attacks all enemies, decreases the duration of all enemy buffs by 1 turn, and then increases the duration of all ally buffs by 1 turn. Another form of buff strip without actually, you know, directly doing it in a sense. Also places a shield buff on all allies for 2 turns equal to 20% of this champion's max HP. So you can scale that off himself. It's interesting that it's based off his HP and not off of like a defense factor, because this is a defense type champion. So weird. Weird on the synergy side there. I'm not going to say I necessarily think that's a W. We'll have to see how multipliers and all that factors in. But it is bookable down to a 3-turn cooldown. And maybe that's why it's easy to cycle into, maybe, perhaps. I'm not sure. With damage on the first 2 levels of this book side. We'll have to see. Bestial Yell. Places an increased attack buff and an increased accuracy buff on all allies for 2 turns. Who else does something very similar to that? I can't think of one right off the top of my head. I can only think of, like, increased speed, increased accuracy, which is like Razzlebark, for example. I don't know why. That's where I'm going. But Barbarian Unity, this is where we're going to have multiple champions. So, my understanding, I don't have a Unity champion myself, but from what I've heard and heard other people playtest and like, examine this, the Unity champion himself does not factor into the allies portion of this. It has to be him plus 1, 2, and 3 consecutively in the same team. But if you have an extra Barbarian tethered to this guy, when he does his A3, it decreases the cooldown of all ally skills except this champion's by 1 turn. That is nasty. That is scary. That's overpowered. I'm going to explain why. Faction ally number 2 fills the turn meter of all allies by 20%. That's nasty. Faction ally number 3 activates an instant turn effect on the ally with the highest crit damage except this champion. What? It's on a 6-turn cooldown, bookable down to a 4-turn cooldown. Oh. I'm gonna hold my reservation. That's a little broken. Okay. Desert Monolith. Or Desert Monolith. Desert. Yo, your boy's hungry, okay? When attacked, has a 20% chance of placing a Brogue debuff on the attacker for 1 turn. Occurs once per hit. Interesting. Okay. Barbarian Unity. Allies deal 25% more damage to enemies under stun, sleep, fear, true fear, provoke, freeze, and petrification. If there are multiple champions on the team with this skill, this effect will only activate once. That's a big deal. That is a very big deal. Faction allies. Allies ignore 50% of the target's resistance when applying stun, sleep, fear, true fear, provoke, freeze, and petrification debuffs. Oh my god. Half of someone's resistance is ignored if it's partnered. And there's one particular guy, and this is the reason why I say this is kind of busted, because by itself it's one thing. With someone else, that's scary. I'll mention him in a bit. Nobody likes him right now. Let's just be real. You love to have him, hate to go against him. Let's see what else is there. The third ally faction asset is whenever counterattacking, instant effects and debuffs placed by ally skills cannot be resisted or blocked. Interesting. And then, of course, the aura is increase ally defense in all battles by 25%, with barbarians getting an additional accuracy by 40. So this is why I think this is busted. We are dealing with the meta that is called the Armands meta. Armands is the most recent fusion that we've had that everybody had access to. He's a barbarian champion. And what's obnoxious about this guy is that he's able to do a lot of manipulation. Not only turn meter, but control, buff stripping. The works. He does a lot. He does a lot. He's overpowered. He needs a nerf. Let's just be real. Adding a champion that could be tethered to him, and even at the just one-off, like just one ally protection, so Armands plus this champion, allows you to deal more damage to people who are under stun. Armands does that. Allows people to do cooldown resets whenever he's using his ability. Armands is already busted that he's able to cycle into his kit constantly, especially with his A2 in play. Giving that one turn delay that he has, in addition to like basically removing that one turn delay, makes that combo very sick. I'm just gonna say that now. Once Armands gets going, if this guy's in play with him, he is infinitely going. There's no downtime. That's a problem. And then on top of that too, that he also gets increased accuracy, which is one of the only ways you're able to maybe counterbalance some of the effects that Armands does. Like if you're trying to resist the sheep, which you can. If you're trying to resist the strip, which you can. If you're able to do resist maybe perhaps the chance at getting hit from like the turn meter reduction, you could technically resist that too as well. Having that increased accuracy just makes him even more effective at doing what he already does very, very well. Problem number two. If there so happen, and now this is where it gets a little tricky if we're talking about PvP, for example. If you were talking about like ignoring ally resistance, that's super huge for someone like Armands, making his builds, if partnered with him, more viable at being able to go lower accuracy but higher speed requirements, making him faster in fights, which is a problem. And he applies stuns at the end of his A2, which makes that a lot more easier to land. It's kind of a problem. I don't know if I would say there's any meta champions currently in PvP side for justifying having a full barbarian team. I don't think I see that per se. There's only like one or two that I can nod towards that could actually have some big viability, like Xena, for example, who is very niche pick right now currently, but has a place in the meta in some capacity, being able to counterbalance maybe someone like Sify, who buffs a lot at the beginning of the turn, giving someone like Xena a chance to just inject herself and pack a punch, right? So, like, maybe that with Armands and this guy, Doom Lord Gregor, you might have something, but I feel like you're forcing it too much to make it happen. Decreasing the ally duration of buffs and debuffs makes this guy busted, in my opinion, and allows a lot of playability into that. So, I think when partnered just on a 1+1, so Doom Lord +1 like Armands, is dangerous. That is a dangerous game to play. I don't like that. I won't lie. And this is the only reason why I'm going to say that, is that it's already an uphill battle fighting against Armands. And I'm thinking about doing a video to kind of talk about whether or not there's a way to counter against Armands without just straight up saying ban him, which is a viable way to play against him. It's kind of one of the only ways a lot of people are. They just rather would not deal with him altogether and fight whatever else is around him. But this kind of makes those countermeasures a lot harder to get through, which is kind of a dangerous game to play when it comes to like being overly oppressive. So maybe a new duo is being bred with this champion being in play. This is a very scary one. Now, let's flip it. I've been talking like PvP on the side of things, but let's talk about PvE. There are a lot of champions that benefit from him being in play. Let's talk about some of the more well-established ones. I'm going to go back into the game for this part, because we got to look at it from all angles, right? Is this champion a good early game? Yes. Is this champion a good mid game? Yes. Is this champion a good late game? I think yes, if partnered with the right team comp. It is a bit of a force. Like you're forcing a lot of like barbarian synergy in order to make it work. But I will say this: if we're looking at champion pool, Alaz is dope. So from a damage outlet / utility outlet, he provides a lot there. Contra provokers. So we're talking about Hydra, for example. Contra Archer, some of the better provokers in the game. He's really, really good there. As an additional staple there. Now, he doesn't contribute as much in that regard, but like maybe you could use the strip chance in the event, like your block buff champion isn't in play, or they were able to get buff stolen or something, like some kind of scenario where, like, hypothetically, that is a need to do some kind of form of buff stripping or buff increase in duration on your team, valuable. But the buff duration increase in Hydra, for example, is really, really good. The buff decrease on the enemy side, also valuable, but it's very niche depending on how your team is effectively able to handle the fight. So I would lean towards being more effective at the fight so you don't have to worry about that. But in the event, it's a good catch-all, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Let's see. Damage output-wise, in terms of, like, other champions, you know, like having Tahanarag and Hydra. Hydra, definitely, I could see it. I could see it. There's a lot of staples in Hydra meta where there's some viability. Faction Wars, it's a no-brainer. Unity champions are really good there. Sin City involvement for specifically a barbarian-centric type content, obviously a W there because he adds to them with the increased attack and increased accuracy, enabling a lot of offensive champions. Think about someone like Torval, for example, who scales off of damage buffs. He's also attack-oriented, so a very good partnership in terms of enabling a champion like him. Same thing with your Carl, increased accuracy, increased attacks. He does a lot of freezing, has some decent damage output from that standpoint. And then the cooldown reduction, which is great for everybody. This is a great turn. The instant turn is something that's very scary, because you can actually tune up a team that is designed to enable the one champion you want to make sure gets into the fight, and giving them an instant turn the moment he procs his increased attack, increased accuracy. It's basically like Shoes In. It's a Shoes In A2. That's literally what it is. It's a Shoes In A2, but it's a little bit more less controlled in the factor that it's only designed for one person who has the highest crit damage. So keep in mind whenever you're dealing with that too as well, which is kind of interesting when you're dealing with like a 3-team with him being a 4-team barbarian squad. So that's interesting there. I think overall this champion is very solid, man. I actually think that might be one of the better ones. I like the Sacred Order one. I thought he had some interesting ones. This one screams that this might be a big grab for any account. And to be honest with you, with the fact that they've added Unity champions besides Sin City, which was a very restrictive content form, where like it really does kind of strip away your champion pool and really forces you to have to pull out like your most unorthodox champions. This guy is going to be a staple that adds to that, which is going to be very, 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 very strong. This is a very strong champion based off of just reading his kit alone. Very, very strong champion and can add some even more oppression for someone. I'm a little worried about that one. That one's kind of scary. All right, let's move on. We have Senna Amberheart, which is a Void Legendary Support Dwarf. Interestingly enough, we don't really have a lot of Dwarf champions, so it's good to see them adding to it. She looks really, really unique. It looks like she's wearing a crown, too. Maybe she's the queen of the dwarves? I don't know. We'll have to see what the lore has to say. Amber Thrust, her A1, attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance to instantly activate a continuous heal buff on each ally. 50% chance of instantly activating and get buffed up to a 60% chance with a little bit of extra damage added onto it. This is a support champion, so I don't think you're looking for damage. So some of those books are going to be kind of throwaway books. Touch of Gold, A2, places an increased speed buff and 2 continuous heals on all allies for 2 turns, and then also fills the turn meter of all allies by 20%. Do we have our first turn meter booster for the dwarves? Nice. And it's on a 5-turn, 3-turn cooldown when booked. Nice. I like it. WA2. This is really, really good. So not only are you boosting your team, but you're also giving them increased speed, which means that their gains are higher, with a continuous heal, which gives them more survivability. This is good on both PvE and PvP. There's no other way to say it. And then having a chance to activate it on the site. So I see the synergy on the A2 and the A3. Very, very cool. A3, Edge of Death. What a name. Revives all dead allies with 50% HP and 50% turn meter. This is a great support. This is a great support. Then teams up with all allies revived by this skill to attack the enemy with the lowest HP. The allies joining the attack will use their default skills. That is a high cooldown. That's a 6-turn cooldown, which can be booked down to a 4-turn cooldown, a 4-turn revive. Who has a 4-turn revive? I think like Duchess does, for example, when it's fully booked. But not only do you get a little bit less HP from this, but you gain turn meter, which is kind of one of the things that makes Duchess a little bit less viable in today's meta. You need to get your team into the fights, especially if they're recovering. Then the ally attack on the lowest HP is kind of scary. That's sick. Especially if you have champions that their A1's very robust. Think about your Rotos. Think about your Georgid, just to name a few champions that have like really, really strong A1s, you know. Taurus, for example, if you bring him back to life, being able to not only hit somebody with an A1, which is a pretty decent hitter, but it also comes with turn meter boost, right? Like, so you get some synergy behind this revive. That is a sick A3. This kit is nice. That's a very strong contribution towards the Dwarves faction too as well, which is, I would say, lacks in revivers. Who's some of the revivers you have? No, it's not that they're lacking. They do have like Melga. You have Molly, so that's epic and legendaries, but that's about it. This is a strong champion though, especially if she has high base speed. Let's see here. What else? I kind of stopped here at the end of the A3. So let's see what her passive has. Healing Glow. Whenever a continuous heal buff activates on any ally, fills the turn meter of all allies by 5%. Oh my. Oh my. Wait, 4 by 5? Another 25%? Oh my. Sorry, 4, 20%. Interesting. This is a strong champion. At the end of this champion's turn, increase the duration of a continuous heal buff on a random ally except this champion for 1 turn. Oh my god. So not only do you get a 2-turn duration continuous heal, but whenever you activate it, it goes back up, so you don't lose anything from activating the A1. Oh my goodness, that's pretty good. Aura, increase ally speed in all battles by 19%. Thank God that's not as high as it actually could be, because that's a lot of turn meter boosting. Now, here's the interesting thing about it. This kit is great as a support. This is a straight-up support champion. There's no other way to say it, right? This champion is going to be really good across any content you need support, which is everything, right? PvP, I could see it. Go first champion, go ham, and even if you do have to worry about revival, if you wanted to play a go second strategy, you could technically do that. Although I think this kit kind of screams a little bit in the side of going faster rather than slower. You could play either angle though, because the revive is a great responsive ability for go second strategies. So I could see it being very valuable in that regard. But I do think that the overall kit does benefit from you going aggressively early. So you can actually play either way. But with the aura, I think you scream more towards like trying to go fast rather than being too slow. But if you feel like you have a confidence issue, like I face that all the time when I went against a lot of speed champions, you could technically play a secondary strategy and it will work. She could play either angle. Very versatile, very strong. Void means that she's a good plug and play to almost any environment. That's a very strong champion. Nice! The Doors are getting some really good champions. Let's go. All right, I don't know how to say this one. I think we have like two more, because we already talked about Wixwell. Giath the Truth Shield. It's a legendary magic champion, defense, Knight's Revenant. Interesting. Revelation Spear. Attacks one enemy, places an extra hit on enemies under decreased crit rate or decreased crit damage debuffs placed by this champion. So it's conditional. It can't be other champions. It has to be placed by her. The extra hit is always a normal hit and will ignore 50% of the target's defense. Now, this being a champion that is a defensive one can technically be placed as a defensive nuker. It is magic, so you still have to worry about force affinity, but being able to ignore 50% of a target's defense is very strong. Also places an increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns, so enabling him with just an A3 or an A1. Not bad. Of course, you can book it up for more damage by 20%. The A2, Truth Beheld. Attacks all enemies before attacking, increases the duration of all allied buffs by 1 turn. Okay. Damage inflicted by the skill increases by 5% for each buff that had its duration increased. Okay. So buff-centric teams can benefit a lot from the damage output here. You can have up to a maximum, I believe, of 10 buffs at a time, right? And that's for each buff that had its increased duration. So this is a very, very strong champion in that regard. This is actually really sick. It's on a 5-turn cooldown. Can be booked down to a 4-turn cooldown with... Oh, no, a 3-turn cooldown, because that's a level 3 and level 5. And then it adds 10% damage on top of that for each book 2 in that direction. So 20% with a 3-turn cooldown increase. Not a bad ability. That's actually kind of... That has potential. Depending on the multipliers and some other factors, that actually has some potential. We have to see what that one brings to the table. Sensor Barrier. Places a 30% reflect damage buff on all allies for 2 turns. An ally protection buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns as well. So that's kind of a dangerous game to play because it can make her get cooked if there's a lot of AoE damage that goes onto your ally protected team. The reflect damage is nice, though. Also places a 25% strengthen buff and an increased resist. Man, they're really trying to make you buff and go ham. That's really how this goes. That's actually really, really cool. 5-turn cooldown, book down to a 3-turn cooldown. This is a very, very interesting kit, but I like it. Passive, Maw of Deterrence. Whenever an ally under a reflect damage buff is attacked, places a 30% decreased crit rate and a 30% crit damage debuff on the attacker for 2 turns. This effect cannot be resisted. So this entire kit does not need accuracy because the core of it, where you place decreased crit rate or decreased crit damage, is irresistible. Meaning that you could scale this champion to either be super supportive or you could be super damage oriented with this champion. I think I lean towards damage right off the rip, especially with that ignored percent on the A1 with the amplified damage factor for the A2. And she kind of supplies her own increased buffs and increased duration for that matter. Basically, the buffs that she provides 4 on her own. Some of these are very unique, too, as well. Like, increased resistance and reflect damage is not very common, whereas, like, strengthening and ally protection might be a little bit more common across your champion pool. Very, very interesting champion. I see the synergy into it. I think this one's going to be an interesting one to see in action. Increase all ally defense in all battles by 25%, which is a lower tier percentage, but still, nevertheless, does help out her for synergy. So, some playable options. Not bad at all. Really, really cool. Let's get on to the next and the final champion we're going to talk about today. It's going to be Glaciad, or Glycad of the Meltwater. It's going to be a legendary force support Sylvan Watcher. Boreal Boat, the A1, attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 35% chance of placing a freeze debuff for 1 turn. If the target has 50% HP or less, this debuff cannot be resisted. Damage increases by 5% 2 times, so it's a 10% gain, with a boost to... What is that? 15% of the chance duration or chance landing of the debuff. So that's what, a 50% chance? Think Fire Knight. It's the first thing I can think of right now as another viable alternative. Let's see what else they have to offer though. Meltwater Cloak, the A2. Place an increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. Also has an 80% chance of placing a Perfect Veil buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns. Then fills the turn meter of all allies by 15%. That's good everywhere. Also particularly Hydra, believe it or not. It is a 5-turn cooldown, but it's bookable up to a 4-turn cooldown. The chance to place a Veil is booked up to a 100% chance once it's fully booked as well. Lifestream revives all dead allies with 40% HP and 25% turn meter. Also places a 50% increased buff and a 60% increased defense buff on all allies for 3 turns. 3 turns is huge. These buffs will be placed even if no allies were revived. So, this champion could be a really good clutch in for buffs and revival. Even if you don't need the revive, you still get it. Nice. As well as a turn meter booster and increased attack Perfect Veil. Hydra is definitely on the table for this guy. If no allies were revived by this skill, grants this champion an extra turn. Even better. What is the cooldown on this? It's on a 7-turn. That's 6, 5, 4. Which means that it will be reduced down to a 2-turn cooldown if nobody's dead. Automatically because of the extra turn. That's a really good cycle. You literally could just A3, A2, A1, no? Interesting. Allies under Perfect Veil. This is Thaw Might, his passive. Placed by this champion, deal 10% more damage. He's definitely a play-in for Hydra content. As a matter of fact, he might actually become a staple. The boosting, the revive, the passive gain, this champion's going to scream Hydra. And also other areas of the game, too, believe it or not. He's a good plug-and-play in almost everywhere. 10% more damage is not bad with the Perfect Veil. Allies under a Perfect Veil buff placed by this champion deal an additional 10% damage to enemies under Veil or Perfect Veil debuffs. Think about it this way. If we're talking PvP, who are some people that Veil that are pretty prominent in meta today? Although she's fallen off a little bit, Duchess. Who else is also viable? Galathier, who has actually risen in prominence because of his kit and what he brings to the table. He also provides Veil. So being able to do more damage against comps that have those 2 in there is really cool. But just in general, who else does Veiling that might be something to consider? Food for thought. Aura, increase ally speeds in all battle by 19%. This champion can go fast. He can also take his time too as well and be a little bit more of a hermit. In the aspect that he can play like maybe a go secondary style. Very versatile. I like this. I like this. Honestly, these last couple champions are actually really, really good. And then, of course, we have Vaultkeeper Wixwell. I think we've already done a breakdown on his kit for the most part. Intercept is going to be the thing that kind of makes him very interesting and potentially viable. We have to play test and see, of course. Provoke against bosses being 100% chance with Booked is really good. And then, of course, having decreased attack AoE and shields and increased defense and shields, being able to expand and increase ally attack buff, or ally buffs in general, excuse me, is all very, very interesting. Very, very good for early mid-game. Maybe some case usage in some late-game niche builds or some niche comps. Maybe there might be some viability in Intercept and PvP. We'll have to see, because Sheep is very meta, and this protects people against that. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see. With that being said, let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think these champions are busted? I find this new iteration of champions to be very, very, like, potentially very, very overpowered. I think that, like, Doom Lord, you got to watch out for that. Senna, great contribution. Actually might be staple in some comps and some synergies there. GF the Truth Shield is going to be very interesting, especially if that buff, the A2 has some really good damage multipliers added to this buff and the skill scaling. The scaling of this buff is going to, or this damage is going to be really important to really sell this champion. But very interesting nevertheless. And then, of course, the Glycat, I think, is going to be a must-grab, especially if you're using comps that revolve around boosting one particular champion so that they get the most output. Think about keyword cheese. This is going to be a very, very prominent champion that's going to add more to this in a lot of different ways. I don't know. You guys let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and as always, guys, always remember, stay ascended.
So